The drought had teeth. By late summer, the sky over the salt draw country looked bleached and nailed to the horizon, a hard white lid that never lifted. The grass lay down as if it had grown tired of living. Steam no longer rose from the earth. Instead, dust lifted in slow drifts, coating fence wire and saddle leather until men's hands felt gritty even after washing at a shallow trough. Elias Quill rode the west perimeter of the cattle spread with the same muted anger he carried every week now. It wasn't only the hunger in the land. It was the way water made men small. When he passed the last broken stock pond, he saw what the drought had taken first, the slick shine where hooves had once churned. Then the birds stopped coming, as if even the sky had decided not to waste its mercy. His boss, if you could call the absentee investor a boss, had sent a new agreement. A line had been drawn between property the ranchmen understood and property that belonged to paper. The company men wanted the herds consolidated into a safe corridor, which meant pushing cattle away from the older draw where the well sat. That well wasn't a bright promise. It was a ruinous secret, the kind of place a family remembered, not a place a corporation admitted. In the distance, Elias could see men already fighting with the fence posts, trying to straighten a barrier that leaned like a tired man. They were out there with spikes and hammers, but the ranch hands' eyes moved more than their hands. They watched the wind. They listened for hoofbeats, because trouble arrived as reliably as a season. They had heard that a band of Apache had been spotted across the low hills, moving with the careful quiet of people who read a country like scripture. Elias had no love for raids, no matter the reason. He'd buried too many animals and too many men, and both tasted the same when there wasn't enough water to rinse the blood away. Still, the drought made every grievance expensive, and expensive things invited lies. On the morning the conflict began, the air smelled faintly of smoke, though no cook fire burned in sight. Elias had just turned his horse toward the draw when a rider appeared at a trot, then slowed to a walk as if he feared the dust might swallow him. Calder was on the sheriff's tack, official enough to frighten, familiar enough to be tolerated. Calder Larkin wasn't young, but he still wore his power like a coat he'd never needed to take off. He met Elias at the fence line where dried tumbleweeds clung to a broken board. "You're out early," Calder said, scanning the horizon with practiced suspicion. Elias tightened his reins. "The cattle don't care what time it is." Calder's gaze flicked to Elias's canteen. "No one cares what time it is except the ones with water. Someone's been messing near the old well." Elias felt his stomach harden. "What kind of messing?" "The kind that draws a woman's tracks where they don't belong," Calder said. He spoke as if the answer came from his own paperwork, as if he'd already written the report and only needed Elias to step into the margins. "An Apache woman. They're calling her Teyana." Elias had heard Apache names spoken with contempt in town, but he'd never heard one spoken like it mattered. "She walked up here? On purpose?" Calder's eyes narrowed. "Purpose or not, the law says she trespassed. I've got orders from the settlement men in Harrowick. They want her found and sent off, far enough that her people don't come sniffing at our well." "Our well," Elias repeated, and the words came out rough. Calder looked at him like he was assessing a horse's age by its teeth. "You want to correct me, Quill?" Elias didn't bother answering. In the drought, silence was a kind of honesty. Calder lifted his folder and tapped it with his thumb. "This isn't about raids. It's about water rights. The paper's old, but it stands. That well is older," Elias said quietly, surprising himself. Calder's mouth tightened. "Older doesn't mean lawful." Elias stared toward the draw. He could feel heat pressing on his face even with the morning still cool. There was a shimmer over the ground where the earth had given up on holding moisture. He'd seen the old well once before, when his father had taken him on a boy's errand with a tin bucket. The stone ring had been half swallowed by sand. But when they had dug away the drift around it, there'd been a breath of cold air from below, a thin promise, the kind you tasted before trusting. His father had said the well wasn't to be tampered with. It's a mouth. Don't feed it lies. Calder didn't know that. Calder had the kind of knowledge that came from ledgers and stamps. Elias swung his horse around. "I'll go look," he said. Calder's hand drifted toward his revolver. "You'll go keep men from getting trigger-happy, I hope." Elias understood the real warning. If the sheriff arrived with law, it meant someone had already suggested violence. If someone suggested violence, Elias would have to choose which part of himself he could live with. He rode hard down into the draw where the land had once been green. Now it was a scar. Rocks sat like knuckles under cracked soil, and the brush looked burned even where it hadn't been. He moved his horse carefully around sinkholes where cattle had once stepped and found only empty air. As he came over the last rise, he saw a shape half hidden behind a boulder. A woman sat with her back braced against stone, as if she'd been carved there. Her posture wasn't pleading, it was alert, shoulders squared against exhaustion. But the moment Elias slowed, he saw what exhaustion had done. Teyana's skin held dust in every fold of cloth. Her lips were cracked, the color gone from her cheeks. One hand clutched a canteen with a rag tied around the spout, as though she'd tried to preserve the last of whatever water remained. Her eyes tracked Elias's approach, not with fear exactly, but with the wary focus of someone who measured distance for survival. She wasn't a raider in the way ranchmen imagined raiders, all swagger and stolen horses. She looked smaller than Elias expected, despite the strength in her frame. There was a bruise blooming at her temple, dark against her skin like an ink stain. It hadn't come from a fall, it had come from a fist. Elias dismounted behind a scatter of rocks. The sheriff's men often carried rifles for show, but Elias carried what he'd learned mattered when things went wrong. A revolver he kept oiled, and a knife for rope. He could hear voices now, his own men moving across the draw with uneasy caution. Their boots made no sound they didn't try to hide. "Easy," Elias said, raising his hand. His ranch hand, a thin man named Rook, emerged from the brush. He stared at Teyana like she was a problem that had escaped a paper envelope. "She's here," Rook said, as if Elias needed confirmation. Elias stepped into view fully. "Teyana," he said, tasting the name. "You've been spotted." Her brows lifted. "You speak it." Elias didn't know whether the woman knew she could be heard. He assumed she did. "I speak what men whisper," he said. "Why'd you come?" Teyana's gaze slid past him, toward the direction of the well. She didn't answer at first. Instead, she shifted her weight, and Elias saw the subtle tremor in her knees. He understood then. She wasn't hiding because she enjoyed it. She'd been driven, cornered, pressed into the only cover between her and a water source that could kill her if others claimed it first. One of the ranch hands, a bigger man with a red scar across his chin, muttered, "She came to take it." Elias turned on him. "Or to ask for it, or to die before we call it stealing." The scarred man opened his mouth, then closed it. Teyana let her eyes rest on Elias's face. There was a quiet study there, the kind that didn't rush. "They hurt my cousin," she said at last, voice low but steady. "We came for water. She walked the wrong direction in the heat. They caught her. They said we'd never drink from that place again." Elias felt the heat rise in his chest, not from the sun. The drought made men brutal, but hurt made them cruel. He pictured someone dragging an Apache woman in the dirt, forcing her to stand while others reached for their weapons. He looked down at Teyana's bruised temple. "Did they?" Teyana's jaw tightened. "Not enough for death, enough for warning." Elias heard the scrape of boots behind him. Calder had come, and with him came the sound of authority clearing its throat. "Quill!" Calder called, voice carrying. "Is she in view? Good. We'll take her back." Elias kept his eyes on Teyana. "Take her where?" Calder stepped nearer, his hat brim shadowing his blue eyes. "Out past the line, back where she belongs, according to law." Teyana shifted her canteen in her lap. Law, she said, and the word sounded strange in her mouth. Calder's voice sharpened. You don't get to decide whose law matters. Elias stood between Calder and Teyana like a fence post driven too late. She's asking for water, he said. Calder's gaze dropped to Elias's hand. I've heard that story from every man who's been tricked by a pretty lie. Teyana rose slowly, as if her body argued with her. The movement made Rook flinch like she might lunge. She didn't lunge. She walked 2 steps toward Elias, then stopped with careful distance, close enough that he could smell dust and sweat on her, not close enough that she could be seized. In drought, she said, everyone becomes thief. The ones with badges only pretend they aren't. Calder's lips curled. You don't know what I am. Teyana looked past him, toward the draw where the well lay half buried in sand. I know what I'm owed. Elias felt his throat go dry. Owed by whom? Teyana lifted her chin, and for a moment the wind caught the edge of her shawl, revealing beadwork patterns that held meaning even in the dust. By the water itself, by the land, by the people who first asked permission instead of grabbing. Calder scoffed. You're trespassing on ranch property, that's it. Elias's heart thudded hard. Calder didn't look at Teyana like a human. He looked at her like a threat to his paperwork. You said you came for water, Elias told Teyana. Where's your cousin? Teyana's eyes shifted, and Elias saw a sudden tightening around them. Gone. Calder stepped closer. Gone? Don't make up. Teyana interrupted him, voice turning sharper. They left her by the dry creek bed. Said she'd find her way back if she wished. But there's no wishing that keeps a body breathing in this heat. Elias's anger flared. The drought didn't just shrink fields, it stripped mercy from men's faces. Rook glanced away. He didn't look away because he didn't believe. He looked away because he did. Calder's expression hardened. That's not my doing. Elias felt the trap spring. Calder's statement wasn't denial, it was distance. It was the way men spoke when they wanted blame to fall somewhere else. You don't have to do it with your own hands to make it happen, Elias said. Calder's eyes flashed. Careful, Quill. Don't start imagining you're the moral judge out here. Elias almost laughed, but no humor lived in him. He'd been no judge. He'd been a man trying to feed cattle through a season that wanted him dead. Teyana reached into her sash and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. Elias thought it might be jewelry, something valuable enough to justify theft. Instead, she unfolded a small bundle of papers, edges softened by handling and weather. Calder's gaze sharpened as if he recognized the paper even through dust. What is that? Calder demanded. Teyana held the bundle by one corner. A promise. Calder stepped forward quickly, then stopped short when Elias's hand lifted again, a silent warning. Let her speak, Elias said. Teyana looked at Calder. Long before your badge, before your fences, there was an agreement made when the first well was dug. My people marked the water with stories and ceremony. Your people took those stories and turned them into ink. Calder frowned. Ink? Teyana nodded slowly. You call it deed now, but it was written because we allowed you to drink without coming with fire. Elias's mind raced. He had heard rumors in town, thin, half-choked rumors about land grants, about old signatures lost in a flood of time. But he'd never connected them to the well. Calder reached for the papers again, and Elias saw his own men shifting, ready for the sheriff to seize control. Teyana didn't hand the bundle to Calder. She turned, walked toward the draw, and knelt beside a rock where sand had gathered like a grave cover. She brushed away the grit around a stone ring Elias had never noticed clearly. It wasn't just the well's entrance, it was carved. Not in English, not in the neat script of surveyors. The symbols were older, the kind of marks you made when you intended for the land to remember. Elias felt his chest tighten. He knew enough to know he wasn't reading it, yet his bones recognized the intent. This was not a place that belonged only to the present. Teyana looked back at Elias. Water follows the mark. Calder's voice went hard. And if it doesn't? Teyana stood and took a step toward Calder. The wind tugged at her hair braid, loosening a strand across her cheek. Then you'll learn what a drought does when it's angered, she said. Elias watched Calder's face. The sheriff's pride wrestled with the fear underneath. If this were only a trespass, Calder would have been confident. He wasn't confident. He was calculating. Then the truth arrived, not in words but in movement. Rook's eyes widened. He pointed toward the sand near the well where Teyana had knelt. "Look," he said. A line of dampness, faint as breath, seeped between stones. It wasn't much, nothing that could save a herd, but it was something. A thin, cold suggestion of life. Elias stared, stunned. The drought had always made men talk about water like it was a prize that had vanished. He hadn't expected it to be listening. Calder's face went pale. "How did you—" Teyana lifted her canteen. Its contents were near gone. "I didn't make it. I remembered it. I spoke to it the way my aunt taught me." "You think water only obeys men with stamps?" Calder's throat bobbed. "That's superstition." Elias heard himself speak before he could stop. "Is it?" Calder swung his gaze to Elias, anger flashing. "Quill, don't get soft. You know what happens when men decide rules don't matter." Elias didn't answer. He saw in his mind the bodies they'd already buried, the cattle they'd already lost. Rules didn't keep a person alive when the land was starving. Teyana's shoulders sagged. The strength that held her upright began to drain. Elias could see the moment she decided she couldn't push further. She reached for her canteen, but her fingers shook so badly she couldn't twist the cap. Elias stepped forward, slow and deliberate. Calder's men tightened their grip on rifles. "What are you doing?" Calder snapped. Elias stopped a few feet from Teyana. He didn't grab her, he just held his hand out, offering. "If she's truly dying," he said, voice low, "she needs water. Not a trial." Teyana's eyes met his. They held a question and a warning at the same time. She allowed him to take the canteen and open it. He tipped it carefully, letting the last water spill into her palms, not pouring it as if she were livestock. She drank with a controlled desperation that made Elias's chest ache. The relief on her face lasted only a heartbeat. Then her eyes sharpened again. "Now," she said, looking past him, "tell your sheriff what the deed says." Calder scoffed, but his attention had shifted. Elias saw it. Calder wanted to know before he wanted to deny. Teyana reached into her sash again and pulled out a second document, heavier paper, folded with more care than the first. She held it up. "The well is on land leased to your ranch. The lease is conditional. You must keep the mark clear and the stones unburied. You must not fence the draw. You must not drive water from it in winter." Calder's mouth opened. He looked like a man who wanted to pretend the words were wind. Elias spoke gently. "Do you have proof?" Teyana nodded. "I brought the promise because they said I only deserve to carry a burden." Her gaze flicked to Calder. "Your men broke the promise first. When my cousin was taken, they came with shovels and a survey chain. They dug the draw deeper. They hid the mark beneath sand." Calder's eyes hardened. "You're blaming settlers for what I'm investigating." Teyana lifted her chin. "You're investigating the wrong crime." The drought shifted around them, silent but present. A storm moved in from the west. Elias could see a dark seam in the sky, a bruise forming slowly over the sun. The wind smelled like dust and distant rain, like something trying to remember how to cleanse. Calder clapped his folder shut with a sharp sound. "I don't care about your stories. I care about keeping order. She's coming with me." Elias's heart tightened, not with fear of Calder, but with fury at the way law became a weapon. Elias stepped closer to Teyana, putting his body between her and Calder again. "No," he said. Calder's face twisted. "You can't stop me." Elias met his eyes. "I can stop you with what's right in front of me. She's bleeding and hungry. You want to take her through the heat with no water for miles? That's not order, that's cruelty. Calder's jaw flexed. She is Apache. Your men will suffer if her people return. Teyana's voice cut in, quiet but firm. My people won't return for your cattle. They'll return for their dead. Rook swallowed hard. Calder, he said, hesitating. She looks like she's dying. Calder glared at Rook. We don't owe our mercy to trespassers. Elias felt a line break inside him. The drought had already taken enough. He couldn't watch it take another person because Calder needed to feel in control. Send your men back, Elias told Calder. Calder's laugh was short and bitter. You're not in charge. Elias didn't shout. His calmness made it worse. No, but I'm here, and I'm the one she trusts enough to let me open her canteen. You're the one she doesn't trust at all. Calder's eyes narrowed. Trust doesn't change facts. Teyana reached out then, not to Elias but to Calder's folder. Her fingers brushed the edge of the stamped deed. Elias expected resistance, but Calder pulled it back sharply. Teyana didn't flinch. Your deed says the ranch owns access to the well because the mark was removed, she said. Calder's breath caught. Elias stared. Removed? Teyana nodded. It was hidden on purpose. When the mark vanished, your paper declared the conditional lease expired. But the mark doesn't vanish. It only sleeps under sand. Calder's voice grew tight. That's not possible. I saw the papers. Teyana's eyes went distant, as if she was speaking to memory instead of to men. You saw the paper someone brought you.
You never asked what was under it.
A hard drop struck Elias's hat, cold, sudden. Then another. Rain began as if the sky had waited for permission. The storm broke loose quickly, wind slamming dust off the stone, turning the draw into a muddy throat. Elias's men swore and pulled their coats tight, but the wet air brought relief and the smell of things waking. In that rush of rain, Teyana's face tightened with something like pain. It hurts, she whispered. The water remembers me, but it hurts to be remembered when you're bleeding. Elias didn't understand the words, but he understood the emotion. He saw Calder watching her, and he saw what Calder hadn't wanted to admit, the possibility that he'd been used to protect a lie. Thunder rolled. The sky lit up like a flash of proof. Calder's men shifted again, uncertain. Elias could feel the power of doubt, the way it loosened men's fingers on triggers. Calder took a step back, eyes darting to the draw, to the damp line around the well, to the storm making travel treacherous. Elias, Calder said, voice lower. You want to shelter her? Fine, shelter her. But tomorrow, I'll take her to the settlement. Elias's heart stuttered. He knew what Calder was doing. He was negotiating with the hurricane to keep control of the story. Teyana stared at Calder with an expression Elias had seen in hunted animals, resignation that still held a blade behind it. Take me, she said, and her voice was calm. If you can hold your own hand steady when you see what you're holding. Calder's eyes flashed, but he didn't respond. He couldn't. Not in front of the rain, not when Elias's men had begun to look at Calder as if he were the one who'd crossed a line. The storm forced everyone to move. Calder ordered his men to retreat toward the ranch buildings. Elias helped Teyana up, and for a moment her weight against his shoulder felt like a fragile thing that might shatter if he moved too fast. They returned to the ranch in wet dusk, the kind of twilight where shadows look bruised. The main house wasn't much, wooden boards warped by seasons, roof patched with tin. The smell inside was sweat and old smoke, a fireplace that never quite cooled. Teyana stood in the doorway while Elias brought her blankets and a kettle of thin broth. She watched his hands with a wary stillness. She accepted what he offered without taking more than she needed. Calder arrived a few minutes later with his folder and a look that tried to stay hard. His boots left muddy prints on the porch. Don't feed her too much, he said. She'll just run. Elias met his gaze. Or she'll stay long enough for you to finally read your own deed properly. Calder froze. What do you mean? Elias didn't answer. He handed Teyana a cup. Her hands were better now, as if the rain had washed the worst of the tremor away. She drank slowly, eyes never leaving Calder's face. Calder swallowed. "You think I'm lying." Teyana spoke softly. "I think you're afraid, and fear makes men call cruelty law." Calder's jaw clenched. "She's not staying here." Elias felt the argument rise, but he didn't want to fight. He wanted time. He wanted to do right by a woman whose survival had already been stolen once. "Stay one night," Elias said. "Let the storm pass. If she's a threat tomorrow, I'll help you with whatever your orders demand." Calder's eyes flicked to Teyana, then away, like he didn't want to admit he'd already been outmaneuvered. "You'll regret this," Calder said. Elias's voice turned quiet. "You already have." Calder left and the porch boards creaked under his retreat. When he was gone, the ranch house felt too small for all the words they'd swallowed. Elias sat with Teyana by the fire. Outside, rain beat the roof hard enough to sound like distant gunfire. Inside, the firelight made her features soften and sharpen at once. Teyana wrapped her bruised temple with a strip of cloth Elias had ripped from an old bandage. Her fingers moved with sure economy. She'd treated wounds before, he realized, not as a ritual, but as a necessity. Elias watched her and felt something shift in him. He'd come to this draw expecting danger and maybe violence. He hadn't expected a woman who carried patience like a tool. "Why did you come alone?" he asked. Teyana's eyes flicked to him. "Because the drought makes distance expensive. My people can't spare horses for every wrong footstep. I came because I heard your ranchmen were pulling water from the draw. I came to stop it." Elias frowned. "My men don't pull from the well. They were told to stop." Teyana's mouth tightened. "Told by who?" Elias didn't answer, and her gaze confirmed what she suspected. After a while, Teyana leaned forward toward the fire. Her tiredness rose like smoke. Elias offered more broth, and she accepted it without protest. As the night deepened, Elias noticed she flinched at certain thunder sounds. Not because she feared storms, but because thunder reminded her of something else. War, perhaps, or the crack of a distant shot. He didn't ask. He didn't want to pull at wounds that weren't ready to be spoken. Instead, he asked, "What happens tomorrow?" Teyana looked down at her hands. "Tomorrow you'll decide whether your law is made of paper or made of people." Elias swallowed. "And you?" "I decide whether to walk away," she said, "or whether to show you the part of the water story your sheriff doesn't want told." The way she said it, like she controlled more than one outcome, made Elias's chest tighten. He felt in his bones that Teyana didn't just survive, she planned. Before dawn, the storm began to loosen its grip. Rain softened into mist, and the world outside turned silver gray. Elias woke to a sound he couldn't place, a quiet scrape like metal on stone. He rose and stepped onto the porch. The yard was slick, reflecting pale light from the sky. He saw Calder near the shed, moving with careful steps. Elias followed, staying in the shadow of the porch post. Calder knelt beside a toolbox and pulled something out, a brass survey compass, and he set it near the well's direction as if he meant to measure what wasn't there. Then he opened his folder and began comparing it to a rough sketch scratched into a hidden board. Elias understood what he was doing. Calder was trying to confirm the lie before the truth became too loud. If he could prove the mark wasn't important, if he could show water rights belonged where he said, they could still take Teyana and leave the drought to punish Apache families somewhere else. Elias didn't step forward, not yet. He went back inside and found Teyana near the hearth, awake, eyes glinting as if she'd been listening too. "You heard?" she asked. Elias's throat tightened. "You knew." Teyana nodded. "He's not only afraid of me, he's afraid of what he'll find if he looks too long. Paper is easy to read. The land tells different truths." Elias felt a chill despite the warmth of the fire. "What do you need from me?" Teyana's gaze softened. "I need you to turn your kindness into something sharper. When he comes with men, don't argue. Bring him to where the mark sleeps. Let him see. Elias swallowed. If I bring him, he'll take your evidence and burn it. Teyana's smile was faint and sad. Then we'll keep the deed safe another way. She reached into her sash and pulled out the heavy folded document again. Elias hadn't noticed it before how it was folded. One corner was reinforced, as if someone had tried to protect it from moisture or fire. This one, she said, belongs with the water. It must be shown where the decision was made. Elias understood then. The deed wasn't just a legal object, it was a moral map. Morning came slowly, the clouds thinning into pale streaks. The cattle moaned in the yard, ribs visible under their hides. Their hunger made them restless, and restlessness made them dangerous. Calder arrived with 2 ranch hands and a look of righteous certainty. He stepped onto the porch with his folder held like a shield. "Time," he said. Elias stood in the doorway, body firm. "She stays until I see what you're hiding." Calder's gaze cut to Teyana, then back to Elias. "You're making this personal." Elias's voice didn't rise. "I'm making it human." Teyana stepped forward and placed the heavy deed document on the porch table. It looked too official for her worn hands, like it didn't belong to the world of dust. Calder's eyes narrowed. "You carried that the whole time?" "It's why I lived," Teyana said. Calder's jaw worked. "Then show me." Teyana motioned toward the draw. "We walk. You bring men if you must. But if you come with bullets, I'll come with the truth." Calder scoffed. "Truth doesn't stop thirst." Teyana's gaze sharpened. "It might if your thirst is fueled by lies." They set out together, 3 ranch hands behind Calder, Elias at Teyana's side. The morning air had cooled just enough that Elias could feel the rain's aftermath in the mud. As they neared the draw, Elias saw the well area already marked. Someone had moved sand overnight, Calder's men likely, trying to bury the dampness again. But it didn't fully work. The ground was too wet now. The damp line shimmered through. Teyana knelt by the stone ring and brushed away sand with steady hands. She didn't rush. She didn't plead. Then she opened the deed document. Elias leaned close enough to see how the writing was arranged. There were names in older script, names that didn't look like settlers' names. There were crossouts, official stamps, and a particular seal pressed into the paper. Calder's eyes fixed on the seal. His face drained of color as the man looked at the mark on the deed and then looked at the carved mark on the stone ring. They matched. The drought may have starved grass and cattle, but it had preserved the proof. The mark had been the same for generations. Calder's voice came out strained. "That's impossible. That deed—" Teyana interrupted gently. "It's been rewritten in your hands, but the original is still here." Calder stared at the document. His mouth opened, but no answer arrived. Elias felt a slow heat of understanding. Not rage yet, not relief, just the dawning realization that the land dispute wasn't a simple battle between ranch and thief. It was a battle between those who remembered agreements and those who profited from forgetting them. Calder's men watched with widening eyes, as if they'd never expected the law to betray them. Calder swallowed hard. "If this is true, then your people—" "My people," Teyana said, voice steady, "have been owed the water we marked with patience. We allowed you a lease because your men promised to keep the mark clear. They didn't. They dug the draw deeper, and they told you the well was dry. They used your fear to make you carry the blame." Elias's stomach turned. He imagined surveyors coming with chains and measuring tapes, men laughing as they shoveled sand over history. He imagined Calder signing or stamping papers without ever walking back to see where the water actually sat. Calder's eyes darted toward Elias. "You're saying I'm—" Elias cut in quietly. "You're saying you're innocent. I'm saying you're responsible now that you know." Calder's hands trembled. His revolver hung low at his belt, suddenly heavier than it had ever looked. Teyana rose slowly. "Now choose," she said. Let your badge return the water to its rightful mark, or carry your lie until the drought kills someone else. A quiet wind moved through the draw, sweeping fine mud against Elias's boots like a slow tide. Then something happened that no one expected. Calder stepped forward toward Elias and Teyana, and he didn't raise his revolver. He didn't reach for the deed. He reached for his own badge on his belt. He unclipped it with trembling fingers. The badge looked like a small sun in the gray morning. Calder held it out, not to Elias as a surrender, not to the men behind him as an order. He held it toward Teyana. "For the first time," he said, voice thick with shame, "I don't know if I'm judge or thief. I won't be either. You deserve better than my fear." Teyana stared at the badge. Her eyes glistened, but her face didn't break. Elias understood the deeper danger now. Calder wasn't just changing sides. He was risking his place in town, his authority, the safety that came from being believed. He was gambling everything because he'd been shown the land's truth. Calder continued, voice cracking. "I'll ride to Harrowick and tell them the lease is conditional. I'll say who hid the mark. I'll demand the well be reopened for your people and ours by agreement." Elias felt disbelief wrestle with hope. In the frontier, hope was dangerous. It got men killed when it turned out to be a lie. Teyana's gaze dropped to the carved mark. She reached down and pressed her palm against the stone ring. "Not agreement," she said. "Restitution." Elias blinked. "What does that mean?" Teyana looked back at Calder. "The water isn't a gift you negotiate after taking it. It's a debt you repay while there's still breath left to repay." Calder flinched. "Then what do you want?" Teyana's voice softened. "You'll help us retrieve my cousin's body from the dry creek, and you'll bring those men who hurt her alive, if possible. If the land has to remember them, it will, but let it remember them honestly." Elias saw Calder's throat move. He looked like he wanted to refuse, but now he didn't have the comfort of blaming paperwork. "I'll do it," Calder said. Elias's chest loosened just slightly. "And the ranch?" he asked. "If the well reopens, the cattle—" Teyana nodded toward the damp line near the stone. "The water isn't endless, but it returns when you stop burying the mark. If you share it right, the drought loosens." Elias stared at her, realizing the twist in her words. She wasn't trying to steal the well. She was trying to restore a system that kept everyone alive. Calder turned to his men. "You're coming with me. No one stays here with Quill. This isn't a raid, it's an apology in motion." The men behind him looked stunned, but none argued. Shame had the power of silence. They left the draw while Elias and Teyana stayed behind a moment longer. The wind calmed. The sky remained bruised with lingering clouds, but the light softened. Teyana looked at Elias like she was taking his measure again. "You could have left me," she said. Elias exhaled slowly. "I could have." "Why didn't you?" Elias's answer rose from deeper than bravery. It rose from the memory of his father saying not to feed the well lies. "I've watched too many men pretend mercy is weakness," he said. "Out here it's just survival with a conscience." Teyana's eyes held his. "Conscience doesn't refill a trough." "No," Elias agreed. "But it makes men stop digging when they should be digging for life." Teyana's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. "Then you're useful." Elias laughed once, surprised at the sound. It broke something tight in his chest. As the day passed, the ranch began to change, slowly like a person stirring awake. Men hauled water from the draw in careful jars, not greedily. Elias watched them move with new caution. Calder's reputation might remain hard in town, but on the ranch ground, people behaved differently when they believed the truth might feed them. That evening, when the first share of water was carried and the first trough began to glisten, Teyana sat by the fire again. Her bruise had darkened, but her eyes were brighter. Elias brought a small tin of salve. He held it out without forcing her to accept. "Teyana," he said, "tell me what to do." She regarded him. You want permission. I want it done right, he replied. Teyana took the tin and opened it herself. She dabbed the salve with precise care, then reached to press gently at her temple wound. Then she paused and looked at Elias. If you can do it to yourself, she said, you can do it to others. Elias blinked. That's not what she interrupted, voice quiet but certain. It is what your hands have already chosen. Elias sat closer, his knees brushing the floorboards. He touched her temple with careful fingers, applying salve where pain had settled. Teyana closed her eyes. In the firelight, her lashes cast shadows across her cheeks. She looked younger then, not because the drought had erased her, but because Elias's gentleness let her stop bracing for harm. When she opened her eyes again, she didn't look at Elias like a captive. She looked at him like an ally who'd stepped into the right place at the right time. Outside, the wind shifted. Clouds threatened, but no storm came. The world held its breath. Later, as night settled, Calder returned with news that made Elias's heart seize. Calder stood in the doorway, soaked from travel, eyes red with exhaustion. They'll be taken, he said. Your cousin is not lost. The men dragged her farther than they should have. But we found her tracks. We found her resting where the creek bed holds mud. Teyana's face went still. Bring me there, she said. Elias started to rise, but Calder raised a hand. Not tonight, Calder said. She's alive, barely. We've got a medic from town. The words hit Elias like a gust. Alive, not dead. The drought had already promised too much death, and now it had to bargain. Teyana breathed out, a shuddering release. Tears filled her eyes but didn't fall. She looked at Elias then, and in that gaze was a request and an assurance. Stay with me, she said. Elias's answer came without hesitation. I'm here. They rode out at dawn. The creek bed was a scar of exposed stone and stubborn mud. Elias saw the faint shapes of men's tracks, and the careful way Teyana moved as if she could read the ground by touch. They found her cousin Delani wrapped in rough cloth, breathing with effort, eyes unfocused but living. The medic treated her wounds with practiced hands, but it was Teyana's voice that steadied her. Elias watched the way Teyana spoke, soft, rhythmic, the language of belonging that made pain feel less like a sentence. When Delani finally opened her eyes fully, she looked at Teyana and then at Elias with a wary intelligence. Delani said one sentence in Apache, and Teyana translated. She says you didn't take, you gave. She asks what you want in return. Elias felt his face warm. He looked at Teyana, and the heat in him wasn't only embarrassment. It was the slow realization that the true rescue had already happened. I don't want a price, Elias said. Teyana's gaze softened. Then you want something else. Elias exhaled. In the drought, love was a risk, but it was also a kind of water. I want you to choose me, he said. Not because the law says you must, not because I'm brave, because you decide I'm safe. Teyana stared at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and placed her fingers over his hand, covering it like a promise. Her touch was warm despite the cold morning air. You thought this was a rescue story, she said softly. But it's more dangerous than that. Elias's heart pounded. How? If I accept you, she said, I become known. My people will see you as a doorway. Your ranchmen will see me as a threat. Calder might stay your sheriff for now, but he'll be hunted for his conscience. Elias swallowed. I'll face it. Teyana's expression turned tender, and for the first time she looked less like someone surviving and more like someone belonging. Then face it with me. When the drought returns next year, we'll keep the mark together. We'll share the water and we'll share the danger. Elias let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped for months. And if Calder can't keep his badge? He asked. Teyana's smile was small but certain. Badges come and go. Promises do not. That night, when the sun slid down behind the low hills and turned the mud gold, Elias built a small fire shelter near the draw. Not a prison, not a claim. A place where warmth could be offered without chains. Elias poured water from the well into 2 cups. It wasn't enough to celebrate loudly. It was enough to mark the moment as real. Teyana sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder under a blanket heavy with rain smell. Calder watched from a distance as if he still didn't know where his role ended. Delani rested nearby, breathing easier now. The wind calmed. The cattle shifted in their pens with softer sounds. Elias leaned in, and Teyana didn't move away. He kissed her gently, tasting campfire smoke and the last sweetness of survival. She kissed him back with a steadiness that surprised him, like she'd been waiting for a man who would understand that love, like water, had to be treated with respect. When they parted, Teyana rested her forehead against his. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "your ranch will argue, your town will judge,
But you'll still be here.
Elias's voice was rough but sure. "I stayed when the sheriff didn't." Teyana smiled faintly. "And I came to the well because you finally did." The drought hadn't ended in one day. It never did. But the land stopped feeling like an enemy and began feeling like a teacher. Elias and Teyana sat by the fire through the quiet dark, while Calder rode to make amends, and Delani recovered enough to walk again. Out on the frontier, love rarely arrived without danger. But when it did, it came with a twist that made the world make sense again. The Apache woman wasn't the thief. She was the keeper of the truth, one that could save everyone if the right man chose to listen.